They fill up the form that I will give 30% of my earning, and they give you key without question asked. Why we can't do that in Canada? We have 30 million people. We have 4,000 vast land and resources. Why we can't
So
do
I'm
that?
not familiar with that, but what I would propose.
I will send you.
Please, and what I would propose, just because we have people here, and I don't want to, I want to make sure everyone has their concerns heard. Let's you and I just sit down.
Single, etc. in MPO office, they say, Mark, we didn't know.
Okay,
this
but-
is going on in other part of the world. Yeah, I said, that's why you are destroying country.
You and I, rather than continuing a single back and forth, you and I will sit down after this or at a later date, because I do want to make sure everyone is heard. Okay, so Joan, on the right to the healthy environment, there's no commitment in this budget to introduce such legislation, but we do see significant funding. So what Suzuki Foundation and a number of other environment-focused organizations, they were wanting this to be a budget to protect nature and conservation. And what we see here is we see $1.3 billion over 5 years to do just that. And so the ask, the protecting 17% of Canada's land and waters is met in this budget. And so I know they're not happy with everything that is happening, but they're certainly very happy about that. And I was one of 115 Liberals who signed on to a letter asking our government to commit to that. So the government followed through on that. And I should say, when you're not going to read this in the news, but I would call this a caucus budget. Okay, so a caucus budget. And what I mean by that is you see things show up. So I mentioned I've been pushing on the Canada Workers Benefit, and I saw some traction in the budget. I know my Atlantic colleagues were pushing on EI, addressing what they call the black hole in EI for temporary workers who are getting laid off, seasonal workers. The opioid crisis, I've been vocal, but my BC colleagues have been very vocal. And what we see in this budget is a lot of what my caucus and my caucus colleagues have been pushing for. The finance minister has listened, and it's not to say there's a ton of new money, so it's $1 billion here and $1 billion there, but it might be here's $25 million for participation, and there are specific initiatives that they've tried to meet the concerns of caucus who have been vocalizing concerns on behalf of their constituents. So that's really what I've seen. I've seen my caucus colleagues stand up on any number of issues, and then I can go through the list in the budget and see, oh, okay, my colleague from Vancouver was pushing for that, or my colleague from Halifax was pushing for that, and so you're not going to read that in the news because the news isn't sitting in caucus with me, but that's what I certainly see in this budget. On prison farms is just to say this one defining difference between this government and the previous government is the approach to criminal justice, and they were heavy-handed and they didn't believe in rehabilitation in the same way, and they viewed it, I think, very politically, and because tough on crime sells politically, but thankfully we're more focused on the evidence, and this is an example where the prison farms, it sounds, for those who are unfamiliar with this, it sounds like forced labor, but that's not what it is. It is, the prison farms are an effort of rehabilitation, and it's people working with their hands and being able to effectively, they're not selling the produce, it's to feed back into their fellow inmates of the prison system. Everyone who was involved with the program was supportive of it, and I know it created a bit of a firestorm in Kingston when it was canceled, and so as an example, when I say this is a caucus budget, Mark Garrison has been the representative for Kingston has been very vocal on this, and so we see his concern listened to, and the finance minister. So either way. But okay, so let's move the conversation from seniors to children. Childcare. So to touch on a few points that people have raised. So we did not run on one thing important to note, there are problems that are important to solve, but we didn't promise to solve them. And so we promised to expand the Canada Child Benefit, and we expanded that, and we indexed it. And we indexed it faster than we promised to do. We did, though, despite not necessarily promising major funding for childcare, we did invest $7 billion over 10 years in last year's budget. And we've seen over the last year bilateral agreements struck with provinces to invest those monies. So we are going to see more childcare spaces. Is it enough? No, I would say nowhere near enough to get us to where other countries are and where we might want to be. So I think it's, I don't think the government's going to revisit that conversation in a serious way until we have a mandate to do so. And so I think those
What's a mandate?
like running on an
part of the
election.
policy.
Yeah, so it's got to be in our platform in 2019 to do more on childcare. Frankly, if we're going to do more on childcare beyond the $7 billion over 10 years and the bilateral agreements that Oregon struck. So it's a sizable amount of new money, but it's not going to fix the access to childcare issue. You know, I've experienced this myself, where around the corner I see, you know, I want to drop my 18-month-old off, and it's going to cost me $22,000 a year. Well, a lot of people cannot afford $22,000 a year, and even I'm making a good living, and I balked at it, and I was like, "Hey, Mom and Dad, can you help me out?" So
Well said. That's exactly what my daughter said.
it's a huge problem. It's a huge problem, and I would say when we talk about gender equality, and there are good moves in this budget addressing gender equality, whether it's on the innovation side, access to more entrepreneurship initiatives specifically for women, whether it's the parental leave initiatives, whether it's pay equity, and we haven't talked about that, but there's going to be legislation on pay equity that was announced in the budget as well. So we're going to see that as come forward as part of the budget. But if you want to talk about full gender equality in the workforce and women's participation, the central question is childcare, and we have to do more on childcare. So.
Are things like
Yeah.
children's aid services and foster care a responsibility of the federal government or provincial?
They're provincial. The only time that the federal government is worried about this issue in a more serious way is with respect to Indigenous communities. And so we see, which is horrifying actually, we see that of kids in foster care, over 50% are Indigenous, and in Manitoba, as an example, it's over 90%, which is just horrifying. And so that's certainly something that the federal government sees with and wanting to resolve and address. So it's not, they got to work with provinces, we got to work with provinces to do so, and it's otherwise not a question for us principally, but that's where the federal government gets concerned about the conversation.
Okay.
I find I want to